The minutes on the clock seemed to stretch endlessly, each tick dragging on like it was never going to end. I sat alone in the dim living room, my fingers nervously tapping on the couch's armrest. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the far-off sound of a car driving down the street. The flickering blue light from the TV cast an almost calming glow over the space. But I wasn't paying attention to the show. My gaze was locked on the front door. It was almost 3 a.m., and Ava still hadn't come back. My jaw tightened as I glanced at my phone. No missed calls, no new messages, nothing at all. I had tried convincing myself that everything was fine, that she was just caught up with work, that this wasn't out of the ordinary. But something in my gut told me otherwise. Lately, she'd been staying late more often. At first, I hadn't questioned it much. Ava was a committed healthcare worker, and long shifts were expected, but then I started noticing small things. The way she began dressing up more before work, the extra effort she put into looking good when, in the past, she would throw on her scrubs and rush out the door. Her phone, which had once been left carelessly on the counter, was now always face down, always set to silent. Whenever I'd reach for it, either to check the time or change a song while we were in the car, she would quickly grab it, laughing it off with some excuse about patient confidentiality. In the emotional distance, it was hard to ignore. She stopped asking me about my day, and she barely listened when I talked about mine. Our conversations, once easy and effortless, had become strained and awkward. She hardly touched me anymore, always claiming that she was exhausted, stressed, or just lost in her own thoughts. I wanted to ignore that gut feeling, but tonight it was impossible. When I finally heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway, a knot tightened in my stomach. I didn't move as the engine cut off, and I heard the click of her heels on the pavement. The front door creaked open, and Ava stepped inside. She stopped when she saw me sitting there, her face carefully blank. "Hey," she said, forcing a faint smile as she set her bag down. "You're still awake?" I studied her for a moment, taking in every detail. Her hair, usually a mess after a long shift, was still perfectly styled. Her lipstick was fresh. Her eyeliner was smudged just enough to seem deliberate, and the faint scent of perfume lingered in the air. But it wasn't hers. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "You're home late," I said, keeping my voice steady, trying not to sound too harsh. Ava let out a small, forced chuckle. "Yeah, sorry about that. It was a hell of a shift." I nodded, but my eyes couldn't stop scanning her face, looking for any sign of guilt. She deliberately avoided looking at me, shrugging off her coat and walking toward the kitchen. "I'm starving," she called back to me. "Didn't get a chance to eat." Another lie. Ava never skipped meals at work. She was always the one lecturing me about the importance of eating during long shifts. I pushed myself up from the couch and followed her into the kitchen, my eyes tracking her every move as she opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. She twisted the cap off and took a long drink, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand answers. Where had she been? Who had she been with? Why did she smell like someone else's cologne? But I bit my tongue. If I confronted her now, she'd have a lie ready, something plausible, a way to twist it all back on me and make me feel like I was being paranoid. Instead, I played along. "Long shift, I asked, leaning against the counter. She nodded, rubbing the back of her neck. "Yeah, just one of those nights." I crossed my arms. "Funny, I thought you said earlier that tonight was a short shift." For a brief moment, her composure cracked. It was barely noticeable, a quick flicker of hesitation in her eyes. But she caught herself and recovered. "I did, but I got asked to stay late." I didn't buy it. If she had been working overtime, she would have texted me. She always did before. "Why didn't you let me know?" I asked, keeping my tone casual as if I didn't care too much. "I was starting to get a little worried," I added, trying to keep it light. She sighed and turned to set her water bottle on the counter. "Alex, come on. I don't think I need to check in with you every time my shift runs late," she snapped, defensiveness creeping into her voice. I shook my head, not giving in. "That's not what I'm saying." I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. "Forget it." She stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable, before stepping closer and wrapping her arms around my waist. The gesture felt stiff, almost like it was something she had to do. "I'm exhausted," she murmured, her voice soft against my chest. "Can we not do this right now?" I stiffened as she held me. Her touch, which used to ground me, now felt cold, distant, almost like a stranger's. She stepped back, leaving a quick kiss on my cheek before turning away. "I'm going to take a shower," she said, walking off without waiting for a response. The sound of her footsteps faded as she disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone in the kitchen. The faint scent of a perfume I didn't recognize that lingered in the air. I stood there, staring at the spot where she had just been, my hands clenched tightly at my sides. Something was definitely off, and I was determined to uncover the truth. The morning arrived too quickly. I barely managed any sleep, my mind spiraling, replaying everything from last night in an endless loop. Ava had returned late, lied to me outright, and then pushed me away as if I were a stranger. I wanted to believe her, more than anything, but deep down I knew better. When I woke up, the space beside me in bed was empty. I wasn't surprised. For the past few weeks, she'd been sleeping in the guest room. Needing space, she'd said. More distance, more excuses. I could hear the water running in the shower down the hall. Ava was awake. This was my moment. I'd never been the type to go through her things. I had trusted her, or at least I used to. But that trust was slipping away, and I needed answers. Moving quickly, I stepped into our bedroom, the dim light casting long shadows on the floor. Her purse sat on the dresser, half open. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it, but I ignored the nagging guilt in the pit of my stomach. If she had nothing to hide, I wouldn't find anything. I inhaled deeply and carefully peeked inside. Her wallet, lip balm, some crumpled receipts, thing out of the ordinary. But then something caught my eye. A small crumpled piece of paper, hidden in the side pocket. I pulled it out, smoothing it flat against my palm, my heart racing as I read the words scrawled across it. Wine & Co. Transaction, 2 glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon. The time, 11:42 p.m. I froze. Ava had told me she'd been at the hospital all night, exhausted from a long shift. But this receipt told a different story. She'd been at a wine bar, and she wasn't alone. The seed of doubt I'd been carrying for weeks suddenly bloomed into something much darker, something undeniable. My throat tightened as I flipped the receipt over, hoping, praying for some sort of explanation that made sense. But there was nothing, just cold, hard proof that my wife had lied to me. The sound of the shower stopped. My stomach turned as I shoved the receipt back into her purse, my hands shaking, unsteady. I stepped back just as I heard the bathroom door creak open. Ava emerged, wrapped in a towel, her damp hair cascading down her shoulders. At first, she didn't notice me. She walked toward the dresser, grabbed some lotion off the top, and started applying it. When her eyes finally met mine, she spoke, her tone even. "You're up early." I gave a forced smile. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." She nodded, not pushing the conversation further. If she had any idea what I had just discovered, she didn't show it. I watched her as she got dressed, my mind racing. Should I confront her now, demand to know where she had actually been, who she had been with? The questions swirled in my head, but I held back. Not yet. I needed more than just a receipt. If I pushed her too soon, she'd find a way to explain it, a reason for everything, and I would just end up looking paranoid. I needed something that couldn't be explained away. So I kept my cool. "Want some coffee?" I asked. "That'd be nice," she replied, pulling her hair into a messy bun. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. The game had started, and I wasn't going to lose. The coffee machine gurgled as it brewed, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the room. I watched the dark liquid swirling inside the mug, my mind a blur of tangled thoughts. I needed more proof. The receipt from the wine bar was damning, but not enough. If I confronted her now, she would have an excuse ready. Maybe she'd met a friend or a coworker needed to talk. She'd twist the story, make me feel like I was imagining things. But I wasn't going to give her that chance. Ava walked into the kitchen, now dressed in a simple t-shirt and leggings. Her hair still damp, tied back loosely. She looked normal, like everything was fine. But I knew better. I handed her the coffee, forcing a smile. "Long day ahead?" I asked casually. She sipped the coffee, nodding. "Yeah, probably another late night." I leaned against the counter, my eyes never leaving her. "Same team tonight?" I asked, pushing the conversation forward. For just a second, her fingers tightened around the mug. A small movement, barely noticeable, but I saw it. "Yeah, same as always," she said, her voice steady. I took a slow sip of my coffee, trying to control the fury boiling inside me. "Do you want me to bring you dinner later?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She hesitated, just a slight pause, but it was enough to tell me something was off. "No need," she said quickly, brushing it off. "I'll just grab something at the hospital." She was good. She had it all figured out. But I couldn't shake the feeling that with every word, another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Too good. But I wasn't blind anymore. I let the conversation fade, pretending to be lost in thought, all the while my mind was working in overdrive. I needed to get into her phone. It was risky. Ava had been guarding it like it was her lifeline lately. But I knew eventually she'd make a mistake. And when she did, I'd be ready. That evening, Ava left for work at her usual time. Or at least, that's what she wanted me to think. I waited exactly 10 minutes after her car disappeared from the driveway before grabbing my keys. If she was lying about where she was going, I needed solid proof. I drove towards the hospital, keeping a safe distance, just in case she was really there. My heart raced with every passing streetlight, but when I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my stomach twisted. Ava's car was nowhere to be found. I pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. She hadn't even bothered to park at the hospital. Where the hell was she? I clenched my teeth, trying to think. If she wasn't at work, she had to be somewhere else. The wine bar? Another late-night rendezvous? I glanced at the clock. 8:17 p.m. I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my phone and did something I never thought I'd do. I opened her location sharing app. We had set it up years ago, back when we trusted each other, when it was just for safety. I hadn't checked it in ages, but tonight I did, and there it was. Ava's phone wasn't anywhere near the hospital. It was across town, near the upscale district, right near the wine bar from last night. A wave of nausea hit me. She'd lied, again. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to stay calm and think clearly. I couldn't just storm over there and confront her. Not yet. I needed to understand what was really going on. So I did the only thing I could. I drove home, sat down on the couch, and waited. When Ava finally came home around 2 a.m., I pretended to be half asleep on the couch. She slipped inside quietly, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood. When she saw me, she paused, then sighed softly, like she was relieved I hadn't stayed up for her. "Long night," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. She nodded. "Yeah, I'm exhausted." Then she leaned down to kiss my forehead. And there it was again. That scent. The same unfamiliar perfume from last night. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm as she murmured something about going to bed. I watched her disappear down the hallway. I had seen enough. Tomorrow, I was going to get the answers I needed, and if Ava wouldn't give them to me, I'd find someone who would. I woke up the next morning with a plan. The events from last night had wiped away any lingering doubts. Ava wasn't just stressed from work or distant. She was lying to me, sneaking around and hiding something, someone. But I needed undeniable proof. My fingers hovered over the screen of my phone. I paused, my thumb lingering over a contact I never imagined I'd need. Rachel Monroe, private investigator. She was a former cop turned PI, recommended to me by a colleague who had gone through a brutal divorce. Rachel had built a reputation for being relentless. She would dig for the truth no matter what. I hesitated for only a second before dialing her number. She answered on the second ring. "Rachel Monroe," she said, her voice steady. "Hi, my name's Alex Carter. I need your help," I said, trying to steady my nerves. There was a short pause. "What kind of help?" I swallowed hard. "I think my wife is cheating on me, but I need proof," I added quickly. Another pause, then a sigh. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Meet me in an hour at Java House downtown. We'll talk." When I arrived, Rachel was already sitting at a small corner table, a black coffee in front of her. She looked exactly how I imagined. Sharp-eyed, no nonsense. She was dressed casually in jeans and a white shirt, the kind of person who had seen it all and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You Alex?" she asked as I sat down. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah." She took a sip of her coffee and got straight to business. "Tell me everything, start from the beginning." I laid it all out. The late nights, the evasiveness, the perfume, the receipt, the fake overtime shifts. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes in a small notebook. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes studying me. "You already know, don't you?" she asked. I clenched my jaw. "I have a feeling." "But a feeling won't hold up when I confront her," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. She nodded, her expression serious. "Smart man. You need undeniable proof." Rachel's lips curled into a slight smirk. "Lucky for you, that's what I do." She pulled out a small contract and slid it across the table. "Standard PI agreement." Without a second thought, I barely glanced at the paperwork before signing. "How long will this take?" Rachel smirked. "Depends on how careless she is. If she slips up, we could have something in just a few days. If she's careful, maybe a week, 2 at most." I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Okay, do it." Rachel took the contract and stood up. "I'll be in touch." Then she paused, her eyes locking with mine. "And Alex," I looked up at her, my stomach dropping. "Prepare yourself. You might think you're ready." She continued, her voice steady but serious. "But trust me, you're never really ready." 3 days passed in a blur. Anxiety gnawing at me. Restless nights filled with thoughts of Ava. She stuck to her usual routine. Distant, secretive, perpetually tired. I played my part, pretending like nothing was wrong, though everything had already changed. On the 4th day, Rachel called. "Meet me at my office. We need to talk." Her tone was hard to read, but it made my stomach drop. This was it. I barely remembered the drive downtown. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I pulled into the parking lot of Rachel's office. Small, nondescript, with frosted windows. Rachel was already inside, a manila folder sitting on her desk. "Sit," she said, her voice sharp. I sat down, my hands clammy as she slid the folder toward me. You were right, she said quietly. I stared at the folder, my vision blurring as I reached out, the weight of what was coming settling in my gut. I flipped it open, and that's when everything came crashing down. Photo after photo of Ava, with him. A man I didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, exuding confidence. The kind of guy who walked into a room and immediately commanded attention. There were pictures of them at a fancy restaurant, sitting close, their hands brushing across the table, a shot of him opening the door to a hotel, and another of Ava stepping inside. The timestamp, 11 p.m. The same night she told me she was working late. I closed the folder, my hands trembling, the ground beneath me feeling like it was crumbling away. Who is he? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel sighed. His name is Ryan Peterson, works in finance, recently divorced. She paused for a beat. No criminal record, but he's got a reputation. Likes married women. This isn't his first time. My stomach churned, nausea flooding over me. So she's just one of many? Rachel hesitated before responding. I can't say for sure, but she's definitely not the first. I stared at the photos again, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My chest felt like it was caving in. There it was. Proof. Undeniable. Irrefutable proof. Ava wasn't just distant. She wasn't just lying. She was having an affair. And in that moment, I wasn't sure what hurt more. Finding out, or the realization that everything I thought I knew was a lie. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the fact that she had looked me in the eye, kissed me goodnight, and still thought she could get away with it. Rachel leaned in, studying me carefully. What do you want to do? I swallowed, my throat dry. I want her to know that I know. Rachel nodded, almost like she'd been expecting that response. Then let's make a plan. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. My mind was a battlefield, caught between rage, heartbreak, and something sharper, clarity. Ava had made her choice. Now it was my turn. I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to throw things, I wasn't going to beg for answers. She had already shown me everything I needed to know. Through her actions, her lies, and the way she looked at another man as though I didn't even exist. I wanted to catch her off guard. I wanted to strip away her excuses before she could come up with more lies. So I did something bold. I invited her to dinner. When I asked, she looked at me with a hint of surprise, blinking a few times before forcing a smile. Dinner? Just us? Yeah, I said, keeping my voice casual. It's been a while since we've had a night out together. She hesitated for a moment, clearly running something through her mind. Then she nodded. That sounds nice. Nice, that's what she called it. Like she wasn't sneaking around with another man. Like she wasn't lying to my face every single day. I made a reservation at Rossi's, a fancy place we'd gone to for anniversaries and special occasions. I wanted to watch her squirm in a place filled with memories of us. When she walked downstairs that evening, dressed in a sleek black dress with a fresh layer of makeup, something inside me twisted. She looked beautiful, and she wasn't mine anymore. Wow, she said, eyeing my suit. You're really going all out. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. I want tonight to be memorable. The restaurant was dimly lit with candles flickering on the tables and soft music playing in the background. The kind of atmosphere that should have felt romantic. But between us, the air was thick with something else. Ava was unusually quiet as we sat down, fidgeting with her napkin. I let the silence stretch on, waiting for her to speak first. So, she began, offering a nervous smile. This is a nice surprise. I feel like we haven't had a night like this in forever. I swirled the wine in my glass, keeping my tone calm. Yeah, things have been distant lately. She looked down at her plate. I know. Work's been crazy. I feel like I'm barely home anymore. A lie wrapped up as an excuse. I tilted my head slightly. That's funny because I checked. Her eyes snapped to mine. Checked? I leaned back, pulling a manila folder from my jacket pocket. My fingers brushed over its edges before I placed it on the table between us. Ava's smile faltered. What's that? I didn't respond. I simply slid the folder toward her. She hesitated, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she opened it. The moment she saw the first photo, her and Ryan at the restaurant, her breath caught in her throat. She flipped through the next few pictures, her face paling with every image. Then slowly, she closed the folder. When she looked up at me, I saw something flash in her eyes. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was anger. You! She swallowed hard, trying to regain her composure. You hired someone to follow me? I took a slow sip of my wine, keeping my voice steady. You lied to me. Over and over. What was I supposed to do? Keep pretending? Her jaw clenched. This is insane, Alex. You could have just talked to me instead of spying. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Talk to you? Like, all those times I asked where you were and you lied? Like, when I stayed home, waiting for you while you were in some hotel with him? Her eyes flickered with something guilt, denial, and for a moment I thought she might try to explain it away, but the evidence was right there in front of her. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. Okay, fine. You want the truth? She said, her voice dropping. I didn't speak, I just waited. Yes, I was with Ryan, she continued, but it's not as simple as you think. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, please, enlighten me. Her expression twisted, the anger on her face shifting into something almost desperate. You want to know why this happened? Why I looked at someone else? She asked, her voice trembling. I already knew what was coming, the blame shift, the justification, the desperate attempt to make herself the victim. And I wasn't wrong, because you stopped seeing me, Alex, she said, her voice cracking. You stopped caring. You were always distant, always wrapped up in your own world. I felt invisible, she added quietly, as if hoping that would explain it all. I let her words linger in the air for a moment before I responded. You felt invisible? I repeated, my voice cold. So instead of talking to me, you found someone else? Her eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. Ava crossed her arms, her gaze defensive. I'm not saying it was right, but you can't act like you didn't play a part in this. There it was. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the table. Let me get this straight. You lied to me, cheated on me, and snuck around behind my back, but somehow, I'm the one to blame? She pressed her lips together, refusing to respond. I stared at the woman who once meant everything to me, and in that moment, I felt nothing. The anger had burned away. The sadness had evaporated. All that was left was clarity. I reached into my jacket once more, pulling out another envelope. It was smaller, heavier. I placed it in front of her. She hesitated before picking it up, opening it slowly. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw what lay inside. A single gold wedding band and divorce papers. Her hands shook as she stared at the contents. Ava, she whispered. I raised my hand, cutting her off. Don't. I don't need any more lies, no more excuses, I said, my voice steady but firm. Her eyes welled up with tears. I never wanted this, she said, her voice breaking. But you chose it, I replied coldly. The room fell into silence. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, my heart hardening. You made your decision, Ava, I said as I stood up. Now I'm making mine. I placed a few bills on the table and turned toward the door. Ava sat frozen, the papers in her hands, her eyes wide with shock. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of freedom. As I stepped into the cool night air, I didn't look back, because in that moment, Ava was already a stranger to me.